I would say welcome back, but it's been so long. I will just say welcome to Sharing the Brain. My name is Steve Magadance, and I'm here with my good friend and colleague who I'll let introduce himself again. Go ahead, man.
Hello, I'm Stu Guthrie, and I am the reason that we have taken such a hiatus. We're going to talk about a little bit more, but we actually did record the end of season one because, Steve, what's more presumptuous than having your own podcast?
Presuming that it will last more than one season, I think
That's
that's what
right.
we said.
And as long as you continue to sit in front of your computer and record them, you can have as many seasons as you want. So we're going to start season 2 today, and we're also going to put out season 1, episode 10, also because it's been sitting on my computer. Something's come up a little bit, I would say, to put it mildly, in the meantime. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Steve, you want to kind of set up our conversation for today and kind of where we're going with it?
Sure, I can try. We're using the Zoom platform, and I'm sure that all 55 listeners are very familiar with digital video platforms now because the entire world has gone to distance learning from education as a result of the COVID-19 global pandemic. So this episode we thought would be maybe appropriate to just talk about how we're living, working, and learning in the time of the pandemic, and maybe looking forward a little bit to season 2 and some of the topics that we might try and discuss. So I think that was going to be our episode today, is to do a little bit of reflection of the things that have transpired between season 1, episode 10, and season 2, episode 1, which is about 2.5 or 3 months, I think, since we recorded last.
And it is the first weekend after the end of school. So as a matter of perspective, we're almost in June, the end of May. Last day of school was Thursday. We're both in the same school district. And like Steve said, we really want to talk not about any of the, certainly not the political issues or the decisions, none of that kind of stuff, but really how this whole pandemic has affected our kids, and how did our kids respond? How did our teachers and staff respond? And like Steve was alluding, how we responded, because we were all in the middle of it as well. And as leaders, of course, we're required to, put on that brave face and try to lead in front of a situation that we don't even know what's going on. So of all those potential ways to look at it, Steve, which one should we start with? What do you want to talk about first?
Man, I guess, I don't know. I feel like this is a podcast about leadership. Let's start about how we handled it, maybe in our individual situations. What do you think about that?
That sounds good. I think it's a fair jumping off point. If you don't mind, I'll start with the first thing that came to mind when we got news that we were not going to go back to full-time school, we'll say. I really kind of thought we were going to jump into synchronous classes. It was my first reaction, that we would have a schedule and, the kids would Zoom in or whatever platform we decided to use. And I got on the computer. I started doing a little bit of research and started looking into what's been effective. I had the benefit of being in a program myself that's a distance learning program. So I kind of had a little bit of a framework from a student perspective in that regard. But that was my first thing. And thankfully, as we read and we talked as a district, we realized that was not going to work. And I thought that was really the turning point in just changing the mindset away from, synchronous classes into what we could provide for our kids on their schedule. And that brought us to a topic that soon became very dear to my heart, which is equity. And I know, Steve, over the years, and this is a 7-year project since you and I have been colleagues, if maybe even longer now, equity's always been on our mind. We always talk about that because, we kind of think of equity as how we view it, but it's hard to really reach out and kind of sense it from another perspective, which is precisely the problem. But the pandemic, unfortunately, forces us into that. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and equity and how you saw that on your side?
Yeah, I think that we talk a lot about equity as being a really high priority in education, and I think sometimes it might be the elephant in the room where we talk a lot about it, but don't always do a lot around rectifying it. And so I don't know if this podcast is going to solve that question, but I think it did flip things on its head, right? All of a sudden, we began thinking as crisis managers, like how we're going to make sure that all of our families, all of our students have access to the tools they need, whether it be academic or emotional support. And I think it bubbled that emotional support piece really to the top of school. I think this year, for our district at least, there had been this upward trend of how we provide emotional supports
Yes.
for families and for students. But that became, I think, priority one, is making sure that people were having some of their basic needs taken care of, and some of their basic mental health needs taken care of, before we could even think about what academic learning might look like, or what an academic environment might look like. And I think that is something that I was really pleased that our district leadership emphasized
Yeah.
when we went into this situation, is how we're making sure that we're providing the services that our families needed in the moments that they needed them, knowing that we weren't going to go back to school like we had anticipated. Because for us, it happened right after our spring break. So this is, I think, March 16th was the first day of what became eventually distance learning for our particular area in San Antonio. Those are my first thinkings. I don't know if that went too far off your.
No, I think that's exactly right. And like you mentioned, we found out, I think, on maybe the Wednesday of spring break, the Thursday. It gave us a couple of days, and thankfully, I guess on our part, is I had told our teachers prior to spring break, hey, make sure you're around your computer, because it kind of was leaning that way. But like I said, having those days to do the research, and then what you said is exactly what we did. And I am so thankful we did. And how we got to that conclusion, I don't even want to try to go back and think about it. But we came up with the idea that, yes, we have to connect with our kids. Can they get on Google? Can they get online? Can they do all that? That's part of it. But we really put the connection with the kid before that. Are they okay? And like you said, our district, going back a year now, has really pushed the social emotional learning, being aware of our kids, where they're at. It comes across all different schools. There's always those pockets of kids and that need that extra attention. And our district was really out in front, in my estimation, of that. So our teachers took to it very easily, and we all did that first, connection over connection.
Well, I was thinking about like where we talked about like expectations, right? I think that, one of the things I remember speaking with my colleagues about was how we evolve our expectations, right? We all have this mental image of what school is, what it should be doing, what it should look like. And what this did for us, for better or worse, and I'm hoping for better, is took all that and just threw it right out the window. And we started kind of from scratch in terms of reinventing a learning environment, right? Because as you mentioned, you're a student in a synchronous and asynchronous digital environment already, but public schools for the most part we're not doing that, right? I mean, you have all different initiatives like flipped classroom, and you have different digital learning sources that were supplemental to what teachers were using to deliver instruction in their classrooms face to face. But all that became null and void when you didn't have the face to face any longer. And what we did a lot of coaching and conversation around was, hey, the students aren't going to be with you. You're not going to be able to offer the same kinds of support that you offered face to face on a daily basis, because kids
Right.
were dealing with so many other different variables. And like, you talk a lot about, or we talk a lot about, like, leave everything at the door when you walk in, right? And there's that physical barrier of walking from the hallway to the classroom, and you want to
Sure.
leave things there and focus on learning. None of us could do that. None of us could do that, from kid all the way up the rung, the ladder, right? There was no door to walk through, right? We were in the environment, we were dealing with all those other pieces of our lives. And so we had to temper and evolve our expectations about what our best work was as professionals, or is as professionals, and what our students' best work might be, or best thinking might be, in this new learning environment. And I think I was most proud of how my teaching colleagues handled that, as the ability to understand, kind of meeting kids where they were and helping pull them. And I think in my campus, we talk a lot about really high expectations with equally high support. And I think that teachers really came through, at least in my community, to try and figure out the balance of those two things in terms of tempering and evolving their expectations. And I'm super happy with how things kind of ended up going, and the direction they took when we started this digital learning process.
I think that's a great point about the work that our teachers did. And I know, Steve, you have a double role too, as a leader and as a teacher this year in one of the
Yeah.
classes. But I think we should shift to that just a little bit. We talked about all these different platforms. Teachers have utilized Pear Deck, and of course, Google Classroom is already kind of being used, which was good. And
Yeah.
we did pare it down pretty quick and said, hey, let's all use the same thing. So a kid going from class to class, so to speak, would have a similar look. But you talked about learning, and I'm always interested in that. And I don't ever want to think of something like a global pandemic as being an opportunity. That just sounds crass when you say it that way. But if we don't take this opportunity to learn and get better at what we do, then I think we've missed the point as leaders, because everything should make us want to grow, right? We always want to be in that mindset. And again, I don't want to say that this was an opportunity for us to change things, but it was an opportunity to look at things differently. And one of the first videos I made and shared with our kids specifically was about learning. And I encouraged them to take charge of their own learning. So many times, and we're all guilty of this, we all know this feeling. Education feels like something that is done to you. Read this, do this, answer this, turn this in. But that's really not what learning is about. Those are the kind of vehicles for getting you into that, the mode of learning. But I wanted our kids, especially when they had some more downtime, they were at home, to explore. And I said this, it's a cliche, but I said, let your curiosity be your guide. Where do you want to apply what you're learning to something you love? And I think a lot of our kids did that. And before we wrap up today, I'll tell you about something we did for their engagement. But so we talked about the leadership aspect, talked about the teacher response. What about the kids? Clearly, they're the ones that are the most impacted. They're the ones probably least capable of not that any of us could put a frame around what's going on, but I imagine they really struggled. And my kids being a little bit younger than yours, middle school age versus high school, we saw a lot of that. But from your perspective, Steve, what did you see from your kids? What did you feel like they needed, or what did they share that they needed from their teachers in their school?
I'm glad you asked that, because I think one of the things that we got into the process of, and several of my colleagues got in the process of, and I did from the parents' context, was asking for feedback, like trying to close that feedback loop, like
Right.
asking a lot of the questions of, what are we doing well? What's working well with this? What can we consider for the future? And so I'm hearing from parents like, my kid is getting more sleep. The workload is enough for them to set their own pace and work at their own pace. Those were a lot of positive pieces. And then there were pieces where I heard a lot, kids needed to be able to see their classmates, need to be able to see their teachers. And so the social isolation was something that became, pretty important pretty quickly. And I think that evolved some of the practice of our teachers really quickly, so that they had some scheduled times for kids to be able to jump in, not for academic purposes necessarily, but just to see each other and talk to each other and share with each other. And I think that was a really, really good piece early on. And that's what we were hearing from kids. Teachers also started creating a feedback loop with their own students. There were weekly check-ins that I saw teachers implementing through Google Classroom, where they're asking me, how are you doing? What do you need? What's going on? What are you excited about? What are you exploring? Like, those kinds of questions were being asked of kids. And I think that served to shape a lot of the content that teachers were creating. So it was, I think, from many instances, it was much more engaging. I think teachers reported a lot of like higher engagement levels, higher like submission levels. And I think those aren't necessarily equatable, but they were seeing kids submit and be engaged on a more regular basis, because I think they were getting some of that feedback from kids. So that's a little bit longer answer to your question, but I think that was another thing I think I'm excited about this possibility of, is like, how do we keep that feedback momentum going? Like asking, how is it going? And using that feedback to design learning experiences, or a learning environment, or a community environment that, people will willingly engage in, because they feel like they have a voice in how it looks and is shaped. And I think I'm excited a lot about that.
No, I am. And you mentioned community, and, at my camp, I say my campus, the campus I'm blessed to serve at, right? That sounds a lot better. We have a great community, and I've really, over this time, just, felt their support. We certainly got emails, and, on occasion they'd send up gifts, which are, it's really a nice token of, just their appreciation for what we do. But then at the end of the year, this last week, we started getting emails from kids and little videos from kids saying about how they love the support. They miss us, of course. But the thing about the community is something we did. You talked about the kids needing to, be together. We did virtual lunches. And this is one of those things because I'm really good at lunch. I don't know if you knew that about me, Steve, but
I think you are really good at lunch.
I'm very good at lunch. I like to enjoy food. And I got the idea actually from Twitter. Somebody had said, schools during the year, we ask our community a lot to support us. If we have festivals, if we have fundraisers, different things. And somebody had just put in there, it's our turn now to give back where we can. And that really resonated with me because we have a local restaurant, a super guy. He's actually on our campus improvement committee, and he has a restaurant. And we asked him, hey, how are things going? And at the time, he didn't have a very positive outlook for his business. Of course, he was kind of reduced to doing carry out. And even then, it just wasn't the same. It wasn't a drive-through type restaurant. So I got the idea that we would have him sort of cater. Of course, we went and bought a bunch of tacos and a bunch of food. And we actually set up our computers in the cafeteria, physically where our kids eat. And we had a Zoom lunch, and we invited them via Zoom to come on. And we did that a couple times throughout this whole pandemic, getting different restaurants in our community and supporting them in our own little way. I'm not sure if it even was a blip in their radar aside from us buying lunch that day. But it connected us all. We start talking about the leadership piece, and of course the teachers, the kids, and the community. And I know you'll feel the same way I feel of all the wonderful byproducts, I guess, of being a principal is you get to be a part of that. And you get to feel that sense of community that you're not just in it, but you're a part of it. And you want to talk about that really quick, Steve? And then I'd like us to think about maybe another episode a little later in the summer about how school may look when we come back. Spoiler alert, we don't know, but we could at least talk about what that would look like and maybe share, our the rest of season 2, because, they're waiting, Steve. They want to know what season 2 is going to look like. Let's be honest here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good place to kind of wrap. I think what you said about community is really important, and we think sometimes, I think it's easy to think sometimes that our community is encapsulated within the walls of the buildings that we operate in. And I think if, one thing that this really laid out, in its bare nakedness was that buildings don't matter that much, right? The physical structure doesn't matter that much. It's the people that inhabitate it, or that walk through the halls, or now in this case, connect through digital platforms. That's really the broader community. And the more we can include voices in the community, the more we incorporate feedback and incorporate ideas that support each other. That's really what I think maybe one of the basic things of school could be about. And I think that's where we're maybe headed with season 2. And Stu's right, we don't know what school is going to look like next year. There's lots of voices out there that are proposing ideas, and there's lots of guidance that we're waiting on expectantly and patiently. But if you've got ideas, the best place to send them is either to either of us through Twitter. I know Stu will put the byline in our graphic, or you can tweet us at @SharingTheBrain on Twitter and give us your thoughts about episodes for the show, or ideas about how you think school could look and what schools can be thinking about to continue to create community. I think with that, we can probably wrap up season 2, except to say hello to someone.
Well, she's not happy, Lolly. She's not happy that we forgot to discuss the impact, I should say, on the dog community, because they are now spoiled. We've been home a lot more. Yes, we come home early. Yes, all those things are true. And the dogs love it. The dogs love it. All right. You've been a good girl. Thank you. Yeah. Don't worry. No dogs, no Dalmatians were harmed in the making of this presumptuous episode 1. She's right back here, I promise. But yeah, season 2. I just love the idea. It sounds like we're so important. Season 2. We do want to talk about that, like Steve said, what school would look like. And we have a couple ideas of who might want to join us. We'll see how it works out, but we would love to hear from y'all. Please let us know. or if you have any thoughts, if you have any questions. We probably don't know the answer, but that won't stop us from talking about it.
That's
So
right.
I say we wrap it up, Steve, and let's wrap it up.
Hey, it's a good goal, I think. Maybe if you subscribe to the YouTube channel and maybe follow us on Twitter, maybe we'll get to 60 followers, and that's a good thing.
60. Can you imagine 60? Imagine all the money we're going to make when we finally get to 60. 'Cause that's what this is about, right? Clearly.
That's clearly what it's about. We'll
Clearly.
see you
Okay.
soon on episode 2 for season 2.
Awesome. See ya.